Okay, so welcome to my desktop. And as you can see here, I have 3 different devices that I'm going to walk you through individually and guide you through how to set up the grids properly for each of these different resolutions. So to my left, you're going to see desktop. In the middle, you're going to see iPad mini. And to my far right, you're going to see the iPhone Pro Max. I picked these devices and these resolutions in particular because this will give you the best range of setting up grids properly for these different kinds of devices. I also, as a little tip as well too, and a little extra, I want to show you and set you up with responsive grids as well too. So now, if you look, all the devices and all the content blocks and the image blocks all are responsive, and they all contract and expand to the browser's resolution. All right, so let's go ahead and turn off all these frames. Turn everything off so we have a nice clean canvas. Go ahead and press F to bring up your frames. The other way to get to your frames is on your toolbar, but F is the shortcut for that. On the right-hand rail, you're going to see design and you're going to see prototype. So if you open up desktop, you're going to see all the different devices that are most current to today's standards. We're going to focus on desktop in particular, which is 1440 by 1024. So go ahead and select desktop. And when you select desktop, it'll bring up the canvas right away. So from there, you're going to select your frame. And when you select the frame, you're going to see on the right-hand rail all the different properties that you can adjust on this specific frame. Under the layout, you're going to see the dimensions, 1440 by 1024. When you go down to the very bottom on the right rail, you're going to see layout grid. Go ahead and hit the plus sign. It's going to add a layout grid. You're going to then select the dropdown. You're going to see grid, columns, and rows. So we're going to focus on columns for now. Let's set up a proper columns grid. Once that gets established, then we'll move on. So go ahead and select columns. As default, Figma is going to put 5 columns on here. So to the left of the dropdown, you're going to see another icon that says Layout Grid Settings. And I'll go through each of these properties in a little bit more detail so then you can understand what they all do. So what we're going to do now is change the 5 count to 12. From here, you can change the color of the actual grid. By default, it's set to red and 10%. You're going to keep the type to stretch. And I'm going to show you the reason for that afterwards as well too. In terms of width, keep it to auto. In terms of margin, change margin to 70. And we're going to keep gutter to 20. All right, perfect. And there you go. You've set up your 12 column grid. So let me explain exactly what you've done here. So count is 12. You've set up 12 columns. So that's your actual 12 column grid. In terms of your margins, we've set up 70. This space here on the far left is 70 pixels. And on the far right, that's 70 pixels as well too. So what we've done is we want to create a little bit of padding on the left and on the right side of your canvas. It's going to be important for when we do responsive web. So within these columns, from the left to the right and anything in between, any design element or design item that's in there that communicates to the developer, that's going to be fixed. It could potentially move within the 12 column grid, but that design item or design element doesn't go beyond the actual grid itself. But if you put a design item that's outside of the grid, that's usually communicating to your developer that you want that item to stretch out beyond the 12 column grid when the user changes their browser size. All right. So in between these columns, you have 20 pixel gutters. That helps with your horizontal spacing. So this is how you set up a proper 12 column grid. And that's set up for responsiveness as well too. Now that we've set up the 12 column grid, this is going to address the horizontal axis of your grid system. Now you're probably asking yourself, why did we choose 12 as the number in terms of the grid? So the reason why we use 12 with a 12 column grid system is mainly because it's both divisible by 4 and also by 3. And what that does is it allows us to designate these content areas to build from. Then you'll notice when we move to tablet and mobile, that's where you'll see the flexibility of this system. So now that you understand the 12 column grid part and how that handles the horizontal, you're probably wondering how we address the vertical. So now I'm going to introduce you to rows. And rows are super important because designers tend to heavily focus on columns. They don't end up considering implementing rows, which is unfortunate because rows really help establish a good vertical rhythm within your design. That's where you're going to get the precision and the accuracy as well too with your design. So I'm going to now show you and walk you through how to set up rows properly within your grid. Okay, so now we're going to click onto the frame, and on the right rail, go ahead and press the plus button, press the drop down, and instead of columns, we're going to switch it to rows. So select rows, click layout grid settings. Now you're going to click on that, and right now it's set to 5. You could put in 1,000 or you could put in 2,000, but instead what you can do is on the right here, you're going to see a drop down, and at the very top, you're going to see auto. Go ahead and select auto. So it looks like there's nothing there, right? That's because you haven't set up your height yet. So we're going to keep the color the same at 10%. And now type, instead of stretch, you're going to set that to top. So go ahead and set it to top. And now your height of each of your rows is set to 8. So height, you're going to keep to 8. Offset, now you're going to keep that to 0. And now gutter, instead of 20, you're going to change that to 0 as well too. So now you see these beautiful rows. Now you're going to see these beautiful rows of 8, right? Let's zoom in really tight here. Now, each one of those rows, the gap in between each line is 8 pixels. And now this is going to really help with your accuracy of your design. You can change that to 4. By default, I keep the height to 8. Even your high fidelity mockups, you can keep it to 8. But you could potentially even change that to 4 if you wanted to. And that'll really get in the details, especially when you're doing your high fidelity mockups and design elements are a lot tighter and you want a really nice tight design. You can switch it to 4 and then you can switch it back to 8. And you could even go as high as 16 if you wanted to with your rows, if you want to have a more wider design as well. But 8 tends to be a good balance, and that goes hand in hand with the multiples of 8 rule that I'm going to introduce you to next. So I'm going to show you a cool setting with rows. If you click on layout grid settings, we had set it to auto. So now no matter how tall your page gets, it automatically adds in your rows without you ever running out. So you never have to adjust it at this point, which is great. It's a cool little trick. So now what we've done, we've addressed the horizontal axis with our 12 columns. And now we've addressed vertical rhythm of our site, which is the rows. This is what's going to really help our accuracy and our precision of our design. And the cool part about this, if you remember on the columns, we've set it to stretch. So no matter what we do, the columns adjust to themselves because of that stretch setting. So let's put it back to 1440 by 1024. So there you go. You have successfully set up a responsive 12 column grid with automatic rows that are multiples of 8 or heights of 8 as well too. Now you have a really solid foundation with your grid. Okay, so let's pretend that we have the scenario where we're going to start putting in our design elements. So go ahead and select the rectangle, which is the R tool. We're going to just click on the page and it'll create a 100 by 100 pixel shape. Not only do you have your 12 column grid, it's easy to adjust your width of your design elements. Now that we have rows, it's easy to adjust the height of your design elements. So now that you've set things up, we're going to align it to the far left and then to the top. And what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that this is the top navigation. So let's stretch this all the way out to 1440p. Let's turn off the grids. And you can easily see now that there's the gray box, which represents the navigation. Turn the grid back on. It's easy to know that this is 40 pixel in height. So let's keep that at 40. Let's put in the next element, which is the hero shot, right? So if it was a product, you'd have a hero shot in there. Let's put that in. And now we can stretch that to, let's just say 320. Let's put it to the far left of the 12 column and the far right of the 12 column. And because we've done this, what I'm communicating in my developer is I want this hero shot to stay fixed. So I don't want it to stretch beyond the 12 column grid. Whereas the menu, I've indicated to the developer that I do want it to bleed all the way to the far left and far right. Whereas the hero, I want it to stop on the edge of the grid. And now we're going to go ahead and copy it. So when you hold down Option, a double cursor, and then from there you can just grab and pull. You can hold down Shift as well too, and that'll make sure everything's all straight. This is what's really great about multiples of 8 is now we're able to really hone in and have accurate spacing between your design elements. So as we're creating our content blocks, we can easily create sections that are even, and it'll help us with actually designing our layouts and laying out our different content blocks. But the spacing in between them, because we're using multiples of 8 with our rows, we're able to easily space out objects really accurately without having to deal with any of those half pixels. Because we've set it up the way that we have, we no longer have to worry about decimals. You'll sometimes see designers that don't use grids, their objects are all over the place. Instead of 40, you'll have the distances like 13. Sometimes you'll see distances like 17 and then 21. All the measurements are all over the place. When you zoom out as a whole, you'll start noticing that something feels off. And it's because of those inconsistencies that you're having in terms of distances between design elements. So that's what really addresses that main issue. There's no reason to see decimals within your design elements anymore because everything is so precise now with columns and with rows. All right, let's add in the second box. And there you go. So let's go ahead and build this up really quick here. Now, because we're doing things in multiples of 8, we can break things up by 3s and by 4s as well too. All right, so we're going to do this next content block of 3. Now we're going to do this next content block of 4. There you go. All nicely even. Isn't that fantastic? It's beautiful. And it's so organized. So now that we have this proper grid set up, you now have the accuracy to be able to put elements on here horizontally and also vertically as well too. Now you're probably asking yourself, if I select an item and I move it, if I nudge up and down, it's snapping 8 pixels. There's a setting that I'm going to show you that's really handy, and it's called nudge amount. So if you haven't already adjusted yourself, I'm going to show you 3 different ways to access the nudge amount settings. So the first one, you're going to hit Command, comma. It brings up your Figma menu. And if you scroll all the way down to the very bottom, you're going to see nudge amount. If you select that, it brings up your nudge amount panel. So by default, small nudge is set to 1 and big nudge by default, it's set to 10. We're going to change that to 8. So now that small nudge is set to 1 and big nudge is set to 8, go ahead and you can close that. So single nudges are 1 pixel. But now if you hold down Shift and you then press the arrow key, those are considered big nudges, and those move by pixels of 8. And you can be really precise now with your movements. All right, so now I'm going to show you the other 2 ways of accessing that nudge amount panel. So the other way, you move your cursor to the top left-hand corner and under Figma, and then you're going to see settings. And in the menu, you're going to see nudge amount. So that's the other way of getting to nudge amount. And lastly, if you look at your toolbar, you're going to see the second last item, and that's called actions. So go ahead and select that or hit Command K, and that brings up your actions and its search panel. So if you click under search, you can then just type in nudge amount and it'll just show under matching actions. And then you can select it and it brings up the nudge amount panel. So those are the 3 different ways of accessing the nudge amount panel. All right, so there you go. So let's zoom back out. So let's turn off the grid. Okay. So let's select the frame. Now I'm going to show you something else. Let's take things a step further. If you bring up your grid again, now if you remember, we set the 12 column grid to stretching. So when we do that, the columns themselves would adjust based off the width of your frame. But if you notice, the elements in between, they're not exactly reacting properly, right? Some of them are static, some of them are moving. So I'm going to show you how to adjust them properly. So go ahead and select the hero, and that'll bring up the properties panel on the right-hand side. So under constraint, set to left. Click the drop-down and select left to right. And also make sure that your orientation is showing that everything is all center aligned. Now, if you were to select the frame and move the width, now your hero is also moving to the width of what you're adjusting. See that? And now let's bring up the 12 column grid and look at that. Now that design element also stays exactly where it needs to be. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change the constraint settings to all the other content blocks to left and right as well too. So let's go ahead and select each one. This one, change this one to left and right, this one to left and right, this one to left and right, then right, then right. Perfect. So we've done it to every single one of the design elements now that are on our canvas. So let's go ahead and select the frame, and now let's adjust it left and right. And look at that. We now have a responsive grid with responsive design elements in here. So this is fantastic for wireframing. This is the foundation, the building blocks of what you're going to do when you start wireframing. Let's bring that back to 1440p. And just like that, we have now the perfect setup of our grids. So we have our 12 column grid that addresses our horizontal axis. So now we have our row set up to define our vertical rhythm and really get things nice and accurate. And lastly, we have everything set up with our nudges so that everything is set up with multiples of 8 as well too. And that really helps with the accuracy and the design when we're setting up all our content blocks and eventually our high fidelity mockups as well too. So what we're going to do now is we're going to now take everything that we've done here to desktop, and now we're going to build out for mobile next. So let's go over, and just off to the left here, we're going to put our mobile mockup. So hit F for frame, and let's bring up iPhone 16 Pro Max. Click on it, and it'll bring it right up beside your desktop. Now that we've set everything up with desktop, we can easily translate everything that we've done and adjusted from desktop, and we can copy it onto our other frames. Select our desktop frame. Now, if you scroll down to layout grid, when you hover your mouse just to the left of the layout grid settings icon, it turns into a hand. So what you do is just select one by clicking on it, then hold down Shift, and it selects both of the settings. Now you can easily just copy, so Command C. Now go over to your iPhone 16 Pro Max frame, then just do a Command V for paste. And ta-da! It takes all your grid settings from the desktop frame and copies it onto your iPhone 16 Pro Max frame as well. So obviously you don't want to be designing on this grid. We have to make some minor adjustments to it, but overall, all the hard work has been done for you. All right, what we're going to do now is select the iPhone 16 Pro Max frame. And then under layout grid, we're going to select layout grid settings under columns, and we're going to adjust the count from 12 to 4. With mobile, because the device is a lot more narrower, there's no need to use a 12 column grid. You simplify everything with 4 columns. And at the same time too, we keep the type to stretch, keep the color the same. For width, we keep it to auto. Now margins, we have 70 to 35. That's really the only change that we make. Gutters, you can keep the 20. So the reason why I halved it is because with mobile devices, you don't need as much margin on the left and right side. You do need a little bit of padding, but not as much as desktop. So now what we can do is you can start pulling elements from our desktop frame into our iPhone 16 Pro Max frame. And if you remember, we've already set the constraints to left and right. So there's no need to make those adjustments anymore. So go ahead and let's copy and paste. So Control C and then Control V. We'll start copying over all the content blocks, and then we'll adjust it to the width of the iPhone 16 Pro Max. We do want to have a bigger interactive area for mobile. So we can double that up if you want to, from 40 to 80. We're going to have the hero in there. Let's go ahead, paste that in. Can easily adjust everything. We could tighten that space up to 32, and then our gutter's 35. Let's bring that all the way to the inside. Now we're going to bring the content blocks over, copy and paste that. Let's make things to double, just like that. Let's pretend that there's a pagination in there as well too. So let's give them a space of 40. Let's double that up. Actually, let's pretend that we're going to make the hero responsive. So we're going to have that bleed all the way to the edge. It seems to be a common layout for most mobile. Well, let's bring in this next content block. So let's pretend that there'd be a pagination for this, but it's a gallery that's offset. And look at that. Right? This is a pretty common layout with mobile in terms of like content blocks. I don't even have to have the grid in there anymore because I have everything set to multiples of 8. No matter what I big nudge, it's always going to be accurate. No decimal points, no half pixels. Everything is pixel perfect. And that's what we want, right? Okay. So let's bring up the height on these as if it's like a baseball card. And this to 40, and this is 40. Perfect. We're all set up with mobile. Now check this out. Look at that. No matter what a design, the content blocks, they contract and expand, but also stay on the 4-column grid. And we're all set up for mobile. So let's now finish things off with tablet. All right. So now that we're done desktop and we've done mobile, we're now going to apply all these settings to tablet. So go ahead and press F to bring up our frames. And let's close the phone tab and go straight to tablet. So open up tablet, and in tablet, we're going to select the iPad Mini 8.3. That has a resolution of 744 by 1133. Go ahead and select that. Let's put this in the middle so it just feels a little more even. And let's make sure that the spacing, oh, look at that, it's like 200 already. So go ahead and make the adjustment there to 200. Make sure that everything's all spaced out beautifully. And again, we're always trying to hit for pixel perfect. Let's bring everything to the center here. Oh, looks nice. 300. Perfect. So now that we've copied and adjusted our iPad mini frame, now it's going to be just a simple copy and paste from our iPhone 16 Pro Max. And we just have to make an adjustment to our column, and that's about it. So let's go ahead and select the iPhone 16 Pro Max, select columns and rows, hold down Shift and highlight both settings. Do a copy and paste, Command C, select your iPad mini frame, and then do a Command V, and it'll copy it right on there. Perfect. So now the only adjustment we have to do is instead of columns being set to 4, we're going to set the columns to 8. And then we keep the margins at 35 and we keep the gutters at 20 as well. In terms of type, keep it to stretch, and that'll make sure that everything stays responsive. Go ahead and select the content blocks. And because we have constraints already set to left and right, we can just do a straight copy and then paste in. And from there, we can just stretch it across. We can keep it at 80 because it is a mobile device. So we can keep that hit zone large as well too for a better user experience. Let's pretend that we're setting up the content blocks for an app similar to Netflix. We have our main feature content, copy and paste that in. Let's adjust it to 40. So 35 margins on the left, and adjust that all the way across, and 35 margins on the right. Let's pretend now that we're going to have featured content. So let's change that to 40. Let's adjust it so that in the line height, the space in between is 40. Make the height to 200. Let's go ahead and copy it over. And just like that, it's all perfect. We're going to do the same thing here and copy this all out. So from here, let's go ahead and let's copy this out. And just like that, we're all set up with great looking grids, proper setup grids with great looking content blocks that are nice and even, accurate and precise, no decimals. Everything's all pixel perfect. And on top of that, everything is responsive. Oh, we forgot to do, all right, we forgot to set the constraints on that one to left and right. Okay, there you go. Now everything's all nice and responsive, even on the iPad mini. Perfect. Let's bring up our grids again, and I'll show you exactly what we've done. Everything's all responsive. All our content blocks adjust to the width, adjust to the width on the iPad mini and adjust to the width on iPhone 16 Pro Max. And the little trick that I showed you with changing the rows count to auto, no matter what, how high you want to make that desktop, if it's a tall landing page, those rows will automatically show up, and they're infinite at this point. All right. And the same thing applies to the iPad mini if you wanted to do that as well. And same with the iPhone 16 Pro Max on mobile. So there you go. You now have a proper 12-column grid setup using multiples of 8s for accuracy and precision. You now have rows in there as well too, to really address your vertical rhythm and to make sure that there's a really nice flow to your content on the vertical axis. All right, I hope this has really helped you out and it's made things a lot more clear for you. Most importantly, I hope that this has made things a lot more approachable. There's nothing to be intimidated by this. And I'm glad I was able to walk you through this, and I hope that you have a better understanding now and more clarity on the whole setup and more comfortable, because at the end of the day, this is all best practices, right? This is about taking theory and putting it all into practice as well too. So I think we're good. All right, so now that you have a better understanding on how to set up grids properly in Figma, your site is going to have a more structured look to it. And ultimately, you want to have a really strong foundation for when you're doing your wireframe and eventually your high fidelity mockups, right? And honestly, with a combination of grids, rows, and multiples of 8, this will remedy the struggles you're having with accuracy and consistency within your design. Now that you have a better understanding on how to set up your grids properly, you're going to be a lot more confident. And with that confidence, you're no longer going to want or even have the urge to skip this critical step in the whole design process. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and if you did, feel free to hit the like button and also hit the notification bell. If you want to give your thoughts and opinions or even add to the whole subject of grids and the process in general, feel free to comment down below. And if you found this video valuable and I've earned your subscription, I really appreciate it. And honestly, it really encourages me to make more videos for you as well too about the subject. And honestly, feel free to share it and also add it to your playlist and continue to rewatch it over again for your reference material. I know with myself, I often do that whenever I find a really valuable piece of content online. I set it up as a playlist and I continue watching it to find those little nuggets and those little gems of information out there as well too that really help me with my own personal growth. There's a saying that I have where it's not practice makes perfect, it's practice makes permanent. And the more you practice, I promise you, it'll get easier and easier as you go. And all this will be that barrier that you'll just break through, and you'll see your confidence just grow within your design career. And lastly, thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.